What up, everybody? We're going to do a little video here, and we're going to talk about a big subject in the knife world. Maybe one of the biggest subjects, and that's blade steel. Now, let me preface this by saying I don't know everything about blade steel. I have compiled a ton of information over the years. You know, I've got a lot of experience with different blade steels. I've ground and heat treated different blade steels. I've sharpened a bunch of different blade steels, but I'm no blade steel expert. I'll actually leave that up to the experts. Companies like Bowler and Crucible, you know, the people that actually make these steels. But I'm going to go real quick through the more popular blade steels across the entire range, from the super high-end stainless blade steels through the lower and the mid-range stainless and carbon steels and alloy steels, tool steels, some alternative materials. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different, not just types of steels, but the different way of making these steels, some of the components that go into the steels and how they affect the steel, and you know, some of the characteristics that we judge steel by. Now, this is a whole lot of information, so if I leave out your favorite steel, I apologize. Man, there's so much out there right now, just flooded across the market. There's steels that I don't have personal experience with, that maybe hopefully one day I will, but I'm not going to speak about those steels since I don't have any personal experience. Now, let's talk about steel. And let's break it down to what the yeoman, you know, the entry level, the less knowledgeable blade enthusiast will want to know. Well, first of all, let's say there's carbon steel and there's stainless steel. Now, the biggest difference is carbon steel is going to have issues, varying issues with rust. It does not have the components in it that make it stainless. And stainless steel does have those components. But I want you to pay close attention to the word stainless. Stainless. Because a lot of stainless steels will rust. They will discolor if you do not take care of them. Some of those stainless steels are very high end, and some of them are very low end. So really, rust resistance, corrosion resistance, is not really an indicator of the quality of a stainless steel. Now, let's go into some characteristics that we use to define steels. First, there's hardness. How hard can you harden this steel? The number one ingredient in steel for hardness is carbon. In fact, carbon is what you add to iron to change it from iron to steel. Now, hardness in steel is defined as its ability to resist deformation. All right? That is what hardness is. The next thing is toughness. Now, toughness in a steel is its ability to resist breaking, chipping, or cracking. A tough steel will not break on impact. It won't chip on impact or crack. The next thing is wear resistance. Now, wear resistance is the ability of a steel to resist erosion of its material through abrasion. Now, that means basically is it resists the erosion of its material while cutting through abrasive materials. And then you have corrosion resistance. Well, that's pretty simple. That's the resistance through oxidation, typically in steel caused by humidity. i.e. water, and we see that oxidation as rust. Now, all of these characteristics are together in all steels to one degree or another, and if it helps, it's like this. It is a sliding scale of overlapping levels in these characteristics. If you saw a list, it would just be overlapping the way these steels had combinations of hardness, toughness, wear resistance, and corrosion resistance. So it's not really a black and white thing. All of these steels have different combinations of these characteristics, and they can be sort of affected by how the steel is ground, how thick it is, how the heat treat is, how it's hardened, how it's tempered. Man, guys, there's just so much to talk about as far as steel goes. So, let's talk about a little bit about hardening and tempering. And steel, when you work steel, you want it to be fairly soft. So it's easy to work, it's easy to grind, it's easy to shape. But you need the hardness, which is resistance to deformation, in order to hold an edge. So you heat treat steel. You're going to bring steel up to a critical temperature, which, surprise, is different for all of these different steels. It is a science in itself. You're going to bring it up to a critical temperature, which changes the grain structure of the steel. You've got austenite and martensite and, just all these different grain structures that I'm not going to go through right now. But basically, say you're going to take a steel like O1, which is a basic tool steel, and you can heat treat that on your own without fancy heat treat ovens and whatnot. You're going to bring it up until it hits a point where it changes its grain structure, and then you're going to quench it. And what that means is you're going to take this super hot steel directly out of your forge or furnace or whatever you're using to provide the heat. You're going to quench it in water or oil. They're different now because water will quench way faster than oil. Some steels take oil, some take water, some air harden. And that is going to instantly cool this steel down and then again change the grain structure. Now at this point, the steel is going to be super hard. It's going to be way too hard and brittle. It's not going to have toughness, which is the resistance to breaking, chipping, and cracking. So then you've got to take that super hard steel and you've got to draw that hardness back. You've got to temper the steel. And typically the way you do that is you take it over, and the way a custom knife maker does it, he's got an oven or a toaster oven or something like that, and he'll go at a specific temperature, which is usually 350 to 450 degrees depending on the steel, and he'll let it soak at that temperature. And what that causes is it causes that super hard steel to be drawn back in hardness. It adds toughness, it refines that grain structure and brings it back to a more workable and usable hardness. Of course, that is different for everything. There's a huge difference between carbon steels, tool steels, and stainless steels in the way you have to heat treat and temper. Some of these things require it being done in a vacuum. You can't have any air. Guys, it is just very, very technical, and we don't want to get into that. We just want to do a general coverage of steels. Now, that said, let's talk about the different types of steels. Well, we've got stainless steel, which has an addition, basically, and I'm going to break this down to the most basic form, and that would be the addition of chromium. Chromium is what you add to carbon steel to make it stainless. Now, it does modify the steel in other ways as far as toughness and wear resistance, but basically, at the simplest form, we're adding corrosion resistance. Now, across stainless steels, a different amount of chromium will affect a different amount of stainless. And that's what I'm saying. Some super high stainless steels will rust easily. They don't have in their formula a super high amount of chromium. And some low-end stainless steels will rust easily. They're not as high quality of an alloy, therefore they don't have the characteristics needed to resist corrosion. So that's not really, you can't say whether it's a good steel just because it rusts easily, discolors, or not. Let's take stainless steel. And we'll start from the high end of stainless steel. And I'm going to pull out some examples out of my collection just to, put something in front of the screen so you're not just listening to my voice. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is M390. And this is from a steel company called Böhler. M390 is a third generation powder metallurgy steel, a PM steel. And that's the next big difference in steels that I'll talk about. The regular way that you alloy steel is you heat this steel and all of its alloy ingredients up to a molten level, and you pour it into ingots and you let it cool. The problem with this is a lot of these ingredients, it's like oil and water almost. As they cool, they want to migrate apart from each other, and you don't get a very homogeneous mass. What powder metallurgy steels, CPM steels, as in crucible, but what powder metallurgy steels do is they heat all of this stuff up to a molten form, and it's being mixed in a vat, it's being continuously mixed. And then this molten steel is forced under pressure through a nozzle system, and it's basically an aerating, atomizing nozzle, and it sprays this steel out in a super fine droplet form. Now, this steel has been mixed continuously, and it's sprayed out in its mixed form, and these droplets are so small that as they come out, they instantly cool into a powder. So you have these little powder versions of the steel that is perfectly mixed up. The alloying ingredients have not had a chance to separate. Then they take that powder, they combine it together, and they forge it together under high heat and high pressure. So the steel that you end up with that's forged from this powder that is thoroughly mixed, it hasn't had a chance to separate, has a much more homogeneous form, a much finer grain structure to work with. And that's the difference between a standard steel that has just been in a molten form, poured into an ingot, and then let cool, and a powdered steel. It is just a much more refined version of the same steel. Now you can do, let's say, not this steel in particular, but let's say everybody remembers when S30V came out. S30V was a huge thing. It was the top dog in the high-end stainless steels. Is a fantastic stainless steel from Crucible in America. Well, the next thing you know, they brought out a version called CPM S30V. And the difference was the regular S30V was done in the old school way. It was produced in the old school way. And then the CPM version was produced in the newer powdered steel type. It was a much more refined, finer grain structure, more homogeneous version of the same steel. Yes, I totally get it, guys. It's the same steel, but it's different. And that's just the way it is in steels. So, we've got Böhler M390 here. M390 is a third gen powder metallurgy type steel. It has a very, very high wear resistance, very high corrosion resistance. It's very fine grained, and you're typically going to find it in the 60-62 Rockwell range. It is used a lot in high-end folders, small fixed blades. It's used a lot by custom makers. It is generally a higher cost steel. Now, another high-end stainless steel is made by Crucible Steel in America, and that is CPM S110V. Now, it's also a powder metallurgy steel. It is a very high wear resistance. It has good corrosion resistance. Now, it has the addition of niobium, an alloying agent in these steels, and there's so many of them, I'm not going to go over all of them. But niobium is what you call a carbide former. It forms carbides, small particles within the matrix of the steel that are harder than anything around it. And one of the more prolific carbide formers that you see used is vanadium. It forms very hard carbides. But the niobium in S110V forms even harder carbides, and this steel is good up to about 64 Rockwell. It has good wear resistance and impact resistance at a higher Rockwell level, and because of the niobium, it has a very toothy edge, and it will form those carbides across its Rockwell range, which is typically 60 to 64. So that's a very good wide-ranging high-end stainless steel. Now, the next thing we have in the high ends is S35VN, which is an evolutionary version of S30V. They added niobium to this and a few different changes, and what you got was the increase in the carbides. You got increase in toughness. Now, initially it was said it was going to be more wear resistance, but across the market with different manufacturers, you've seen that S30V, the original version, was a little more wear resistant. Now, S30V, like I said, it was a fantastic steel. This is a custom knife in S30V. It was made in 2008. At that time, top of the line. Top of the line, guys. Fantastic steel, good corrosion resistance. Now, let me say before I get into S30V, it was a steel that was created exclusively for cutlery. A lot of these steels, they came from an industrial use, an aerospace use, a tool and die use, automotive use. I mean, just all kinds of different things with steels. Now, the next thing is, as we go through the super steels, you're gonna, once you drop out of the super steels, which are the Böhler M390s, the Crucible, the S110Vs, S90Vs, 20CVs, you've got Carpenter's Steels, another American company doing high-end stainless steels. Once you drop out of those steels, you're going to go into what's considered high-end steels. That's your S30 and your S35, CPM 154. Now, those are very good steels. They're considered high-end stainless steels, and they're spread across multiple manufacturers on the high end. You'll see them a lot in knives that are in the $200 to $300 range. Now, as we go through these grades, there's going to be a high end to that grade and a low end, and the low end, depending on who you talk to, is a crossover point to the next range. Now, in the high end, and you're going the S35VN, the CPM S30, the CPM 154, or ATS 34, which is a Japanese version. You're going to go from that to the upper end of the mid grades, and that's going to be like your VG10, the 14C28 Sandvik. You're going to step down from there and maybe go to 440C, which is an old school stainless. But 3 decades ago, that was considered a high-end stainless steel, 440C. All right. high carbon. It is not as complex an alloy. It doesn't have the more modern technological alloying that the modern steels do, because, you know, just like everything else, the steel manufacturers learn as the years go by. And I want to stop right here and say 440C, a lot of people say this is a lower end steel, it's a mid-grade steel, but you got to remember, at one time it was considered a high-end steel. Just because better steels came out, this steel didn't get worse, it stayed the same. It's a good steel. So just because something's old does not make it bad. You got to remember, it was a high-end steel at one time. As you step down from there, you're going to go to AUS 8, steels like HCR13 MOV. You're going to get the AUS 8 and a lot of cold steel, or Columbia River products. I'm sorry, cold steel, but you'll get a lot of them in there too. Cold steel uses a lot of AUS 8. And then your next step down maybe might be HCR13 MOV, which is used in a lot of Kershaw products. And that is a mid-grade Chinese steel that is basically, it is within 5% of the carbon content of what AUS 8 is. They are very, very comparable depending on their heat treat. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about some tool steels. Now, I don't have much in the way of tool steels in my collection except for D2. And D2 is a World War II era tool steel, and it is considered semi-stainless. In fact, it only misses being considered a stainless steel by about 1% of chromium. It is very wear resistant for a non-stain, or not wear resistant, but corrosion resistant for a non-stainless steel. It has good wear resistance and good toughness, but it is an old school tool steel. You might find in tool steels something like M4 or CPM M4. This is a very high-end modern tool steel. It has extremely good toughness, which again is the resistance to breaking, chipping, cracking. It has a high hardenability. It has good wear resistance, good impact resistance. You will see M4 used in a lot of competition cutters. Then you've got other tool steels, 52100, A2, O1. These are going to be scattered across the knife world, and they are tool steels. They came from tool and die, from industry. They were just taken, basically most of the time they're grabbed up by custom knife makers and used for their superior wear resistance and toughness. Now, the next thing we'll talk about is alloy steels. Alloy steels are like your carbon steels, but they have just a little bit of chromium in them. Not enough to make them stainless, but they just have a little bit for toughness, and it'll add a little bit of wear resistance, and that steel's like 5160. Beyond that, you've got your carbon steels. Carbon steels are basic steels. They're iron and carbon, basically. And mostly what you'll see in carbon steels are your 10 series. That's 1095, 1085, 1075, 1045. Now, the 95, 85, 75, 45 denote the percentage of carbon. 1095 has got 0.95% carbon in it. You're able to harden it harder than 1045, which only has 0.45% carbon in it. All right. So, the next thing, let's talk about some steel alternatives. Well, the first one that's going to come to mind is titanium, which is nowhere even approaching steel. Titanium is a totally different element from iron. And you do not see titanium used a lot for blades. The number one reason is it is not hardenable like steel. Now, there is a version of titanium that is fairly common. Mission Knives uses it, and it's called beta titanium, but it cannot be hardened to even like 50 Rockwell. I think the upper end for it is like 47 or 49 Rockwell, and that's pretty soft. So with titanium blades, what you'll see is they have been what you call carbidized. They've had a layer of carbides added to them. And again, carbides are very, very hard. You'll see that in a layer along the edge of titanium blades, and there's a machine, a carbidizer, that's used to do that, and it basically welds carbides, whether it's vanadium or tungsten or niobium or whatever you use as your carbide supplier, and it'll leave a really, really toothy edge. If you looked at it under a microscope, it would look like a little bitty mountain range, toothy mountain range along the edge of the blade. And you never have to sharpen those pretty much, because as those carbides fracture under use, they leave new edges that are sharp. The next thing is stellite. Stellite has no iron in it at all. Very few makers use stellite. It is very, very tough, has high wear resistance. I think it's pretty much corrosion proof, just like titanium is. Tom Mayo used to use stellite quite a bit in his custom knives. I haven't followed him in a while, but he probably does use stellite. It's pretty expensive. There's not a lot of it out there that to be used, so you don't see it a lot. Now, guys, I know that I didn't cover everything here. I didn't cover every type of steel. I didn't cover every component of steel, every characteristic of steel, because right now I'm at almost 30 minutes on this video, and I haven't covered 1/1000th of the information. The best thing is to go online and find this information. There's all kinds. If you just look up knife steel types, knife steel information, knife steel facts, you're going to find all types of information. Just about every knife seller online has got a page on their website dedicated to knife steels. A lot of the manufacturers' catalogs, like Columbia River or Benchmade or Spyderco or Zero Tolerance, whatever brand, they'll have a page dedicated to the knife steels that they use. There's just so much, just thousands of words worth of information, just pages and pages and pages, guys. But I just wanted to give a little bit of a breakdown, and honestly, I probably just told you enough to confuse you even more. But my intent was just to give you the basic information to lead you into your own search for information on common knife steels, and even the uncommon ones. So guys, listen, I hope that you take something out of this. I tried to do as best I could. I've got an information board here, a dry erase board, and it's got so much crap crammed on it right now, I don't even know if I even talked about everything. But guys, and there's so much more. I mean, just talking about how the blade grind affects how the steel performs, I didn't even get into that. So, yeah. Anyway, guys, I hope you take something out of this. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch one of my videos. God bless all of you, and you have a good day.